Hello, today, Alaica will tell you a short social psychology story called So Shocking 3 Nights of Love with My Husband. Let's explore this story with Alaica. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Alaica. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. I was 28 years old, a successful obstetrician with my own thriving ultrasound clinic. Patients trusted me. My work was fulfilling, and my clinic was always bustling with clients. I was proud of what I had built, and I knew I was beautiful, confident even. People often said I was the kind of woman who had it all. And why wouldn't they? I was married to Ethan, a famous actor and model, whose face graced billboards and magazine covers across the country. Women envied me, men admired him, and together, we looked like the picture-perfect couple. But appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the surface of my seemingly perfect life was a deep, unshakable loneliness. Ethan was always away, traveling for work, filming movies, or attending events. Weeks, sometimes months, would pass without him coming home. And when he did, it was as if he was a stranger. He would kiss me on the cheek, ask me how I was and sold, and then retreat into his own world. I longed for his touch, his attention, his love. But all I got was silence. I tried to understand. I told myself it was his job, that he was working hard for us, for our future. But the truth was, I felt abandoned. I was a young woman, newly married, and yet I spent most of my nights alone in a cold, empty bed. The ache in my chest grew heavier with each passing day. I wanted to be held, to be loved, to feel like I mattered to him. But Ethan was too busy being a star to notice the cracks forming in our marriage. As if that wasn't enough, I had to deal with Helen, my mother-in-law. She was a traditional, controlling woman who clung to outdated values as if they were sacred. Helen believed a woman's place was in the home, serving her husband and raising children. She disapproved of my career, my independence, and even the way I dressed. A proper wife doesn't wear short skirts, she would say, her voice dripping with judgment. You're a married woman now, Quinn. You should act like one. Living with her was suffocating. She scrutinized everything I did, from the meals I cooked to the way I spoke to Ethan. And when Ethan wasn't home, which was most of the time, she made it her mission to remind me of my shortcomings. You're not a real wife, she once said, her eyes cold and unfeeling. A real wife would have given my son a child by now. Her words cut deep. I wanted children, but how could I have them when my husband was never around? I had begged Ethan to go with me to a fertility clinic to see if there was something wrong, but he brushed me off. We're fine, he said dismissively. It'll happen when it happens. But it wasn't happening, and I was left to bear the weight of Helen's accusations alone. One evening, Ethan called to tell me he was coming home. I'll be staying for a while, he said, his voice casual, as if he hadn't been gone for 3 months. My heart leapt with joy. I rushed to the market, buying all his favorite foods, determined to make his homecoming special. But when I told Helen, she scoffed. He didn't even tell me he was coming, she said, her tone bitter. That boy only thinks about you now. He's forgotten his own mother. I ignored her and focused on preparing dinner. When Ethan finally arrived, I ran to greet him, throwing my arms around his neck. Welcome home, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. He smiled and kissed my forehead, but there was a distance in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. That night, after dinner, I waited for him in our bedroom. I had dressed in his favorite nightgown, hoping to rekindle the spark that had long since faded. But when he came to bed, he simply kissed my cheek, turned off the light, and fell asleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, tears streaming down my face. I felt invisible, unwanted, and utterly alone. The next morning, I found a message on Ethan's phone. It was from Olivia, his co-star in his latest film. "Can't wait to see you again," it read, followed by a heart emoji. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. My worst fears were coming true. Ethan was having an affair. I confronted him that evening, my voice shaking with anger and pain. "Who is she?" I demanded, holding up his phone. He looked at me, his expression unreadable, and said, "It's not what you think." But I knew better. The late nights, the distance, the coldness, it all made sense now. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make him feel the pain he had caused me. But instead, I walked away. I locked myself in the bathroom and cried until there were no tears left. My perfect life was a lie, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep pretending. The night I lost myself began like any other. I sat alone in my empty house, staring at the clock as the minutes dragged by. Ethan had left again, off to another film set, another glamorous location, another life that didn't include me. My heart ached with the weight of his absence. But tonight, it was heavier than usual. I couldn't stop thinking about the message I had found on his phone, the one from Olivia. Her words haunted me. "Can't wait to see you again." I had confronted him, but his denial was as cold as his touch. "You're imagining things," he had said, brushing me off like I was nothing. I wasn't imagining it. I knew the truth. Ethan was cheating on me, and I was powerless to stop it. The man I had married, the man I had loved with every fiber of my being, had betrayed me. And now I was left to pick up the pieces of a life that felt like it was crumbling around me. That night, I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with memories of a love that no longer existed. I grabbed my coat and my keys and drove aimlessly through the city, the streets blurred by my tears. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay still. I needed to escape, to forget, to feel something, anything, other than the pain that was consuming me. I ended up at a bar, a place I had never been before. It was dimly lit, with the faint hum of music and the low murmur of conversations filling the air. I slid onto a stool at the bar and ordered a drink, something strong enough to numb the ache in my chest. The first sip burned my throat, but I welcomed the sensation. It was better than the emptiness. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see a man, tall and handsome, with a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice smooth and inviting. I nodded, unable to find the words to explain the storm raging inside me. "Let me buy you another," he said, signaling to the bartender. I should have said no. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stayed. I let him buy me another drink, and then another. We talked, though I couldn't tell you what about. His words were a blur, a distraction from the pain that had been my constant companion for so long. He made me laugh, something I hadn't done in what felt like forever. For a moment, I forgot about Ethan, about Olivia, about the life I had lost. But the moment didn't last. As the alcohol coursed through my veins, my thoughts grew darker. I thought about Ethan, about how he had left me, about how he was probably with her right now. The anger bubbled up inside me, mixing with the sadness until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I wanted to hurt him the way he had hurt me. I wanted to feel wanted, to feel desired, to feel alive. The man beside me must have sensed my vulnerability because he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You don't have to be alone tonight," he said, his breath warm against my ear. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and for a moment, I hesitated. But then I thought about Ethan, about how he had abandoned me, about how he had chosen someone else, and I made a choice. "Let's go," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes, and led me out of the bar. We ended up at a hotel, a place I didn't recognize and didn't care to. The room was small and impersonal, but it didn't matter. I wasn't there for the ambiance. I was there to forget. But I didn't forget. As he kissed me, as his hands roamed my body, all I could think about was Ethan. I thought about the way he used to look at me, the way he used to hold me, the way he used to make me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And I hated myself for it. I hated myself for being there, for letting a stranger touch me, for trying to fill the void Ethan had left behind. When it was over, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, no closure, just emptiness. The man fell asleep beside me, but I couldn't stay. I slipped out of the bed, gathered my things, and left without a word. As I walked back to my car, the weight of what I had done crashed down on me. I had betrayed myself, my values, my marriage, even if it was already broken. I drove home in silence, the tears streaming down my face. I promised myself it would never happen again. I would never let myself sink that low, no matter how much pain I was in. Ethan may have broken my heart, but I wouldn't let him destroy me. I would pick up the pieces and rebuild my life, one step at a time. The day I met Ryan was the day my life began to change. It had been months since my divorce from Ethan, and I was still picking up the pieces of my shattered heart. I had thrown myself into my work, spending long hours at the clinic, trying to drown out the memories of a marriage that had left me broken. My days were filled with patients, charts, and the hum of ultrasound machines. But my nights were a different story. They were quiet, lonely, and filled with the echoes of what could have been. I wasn't looking for love. In fact, I had sworn it off entirely. After Ethan, I didn't think I could trust anyone again. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. Ryan walked into my clinic one rainy afternoon, not as a patient, but as a contractor. He had been hired to renovate the building next door, and he had come to introduce himself and discuss the potential noise disruptions. From the moment I saw him, I felt something stir inside me, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Ryan was tall, with broad shoulders and a kind smile that reached his eyes. He exuded a quiet confidence, the kind that didn't demand attention, but earned it effortlessly. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice warm and steady. "I just wanted to make sure the construction next door doesn't interfere with your work." I assured him it wouldn't, and we ended up talking longer than I had intended. There was something about him that put me at ease, something genuine and unpretentious. He wasn't like Ethan, who had always been larger than life, always performing, even when the cameras weren't rolling. Ryan was real, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I found myself smiling without forcing it. Over the next few weeks, Ryan and I crossed paths often. He would stop by the clinic to check on the noise levels, and each time, our conversations grew longer and more personal. I learned that he owned a small construction company, that he had lost his parents at a young age, and that he had built his life from the ground up. He was hardworking, honest, and kind. Qualities I hadn't realized I had been missing until I saw them in him. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I found myself sitting in my car, staring at the steering wheel. I didn't want to go home to an empty house, to the silence that had become my constant companion. On a whim, I called Ryan. "Are you busy?" I asked, my voice hesitant. "Not at all," he replied. "What's on your mind?" "I don't know," I admitted. I don't want to be alone tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I regretted calling. But then Ryan said, "Come over, I'll make dinner." That night, as I sat in Ryan's cozy apartment, eating the best spaghetti I'd ever had, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Ryan didn't try to impress me or sweep me off my feet. He just listened, really listened as I told him about my life, my work, and my fears. And when I told him about Ethan, about the betrayal and the pain, he didn't judge me or pity me. He just said, "You deserve better." Those 3 words stayed with me long after I left his apartment. For the first time, I began to believe them. I began to believe that I deserved more than what Ethan had given me, that I deserved to be loved and valued for who I was. Ryan and I started seeing each other more often. He wasn't just a distraction from my pain. He was a source of light in the darkness. He made me laugh. He made me feel safe. And most importantly, he made me feel like I mattered. And when I introduced him to Grace, my daughter, he treated her with the same kindness and respect he showed me. He didn't just tolerate her, he adored her. He played with her, read her bedtime stories, and even helped her build a dollhouse. Watching them together, I felt my heart begin to heal. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Grace asleep in her room, Ryan took my hand in his. "I know you've been hurt," he said, his voice soft but steady. "And I know it's hard for you to trust again, but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Tears filled my eyes as I looked at him. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I don't want to get hurt again." "I know," he said, squeezing my hand. "But I promise you, I'll never give you a reason to doubt me." In that moment, I realized that Ryan wasn't just a new beginning. He was a second chance at happiness. He wasn't trying to fix me or erase my past. He was simply offering to stand by me as I rebuilt my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. Ethan's downfall wasn't sudden. It was slow, like watching a once mighty tree rot from the inside out, its grandeur fading until it finally collapses under its own weight. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I can't say I felt sorry for him either. He had made his choices, and now he was living with the consequences. After our divorce, Ethan's life seemed to carry on as if nothing had changed. He was still the golden boy of Hollywood, his face plastered on billboards and magazine covers. Paparazzi followed him everywhere, and his name was always in the headlines. But behind the glitz and glamour, cracks were beginning to show. It started with Olivia, the woman he had chosen over me. Their affair had been the final nail in the coffin of our marriage, and for a while, it seemed like they were the perfect couple. They attended red carpet events together, smiling for the cameras, their hands intertwined as if they were inseparable. But the truth has a way of surfacing no matter how deeply you try to bury it. Rumors began to circulate about Ethan's infidelity, not with just one woman, but with several. Olivia, it seemed, was just another name on a long list of conquests. The tabloids had a field day, publishing story after story about his affairs, his late-night escapades, and his reckless behavior. His once adoring fans began to turn on him, their admiration replaced by disappointment and disgust. I heard about it all through the grapevine. Friends, colleagues, even strangers would bring it up in passing, their voices tinged with curiosity or schadenfreude. "Did you see the latest about Ethan?" they would ask, their eyes gleaming with gossip. I would nod politely, pretending not to care, but inside, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to gloat, to revel in the fact that he was finally getting what he deserved. But another part of me felt a deep, aching sadness. This was the man I had once loved, the man I had built a life with, and now he was falling apart. The scandals took a toll on his career. Directors stopped calling, and the offers dried up. The roles he did manage to land were small, insignificant, a far cry from the leading man he had once been. His name, once synonymous with success, became a punchline. He tried to salvage his reputation, giving interviews where he painted himself as a victim of the media. But it was too late. The damage was done. I thought that would be the end of it, that Ethan would fade into obscurity and leave me and Grace alone. But I was wrong. One evening, as I was putting Grace to bed, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from Ethan. "Can we talk?" it read. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. It had been months since I had heard from him, and I wasn't sure I wanted to open that door again. But curiosity got the better of me and I replied, "What do you want?" He called me almost immediately. His voice, once so confident and commanding, was now shaky and uncertain. "I need to see Grace," he said. "I know I've made mistakes, but I want to be a part of her life." I felt a surge of anger rise within me. "You want to be a part of her life now?" I snapped. "Where were you when she was born? Where were you when she took her first steps, said her first words? You don't get to waltz back in and play the doting father whenever it suits you." "I know I messed up," he said, his voice breaking, "but I'm trying to change. Please, Quinn, just give me a chance." I wanted to hang up, to tell him he had lost his chance the moment he chose his career, and Olivia, over his family. But then I thought about Grace. She was too young to understand the complexities of our relationship, too innocent to bear the weight of our mistakes. She deserved to know her father, even if he was flawed. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "You can see her. But this isn't about you, Ethan. It's about her. Don't make promises you can't keep." When Ethan came to visit, he looked like a shadow of the man I had once known. His eyes were tired, his face lined with stress and regret. Grace, oblivious to the tension between us, ran to him with open arms. "Daddy!" she cried, her voice filled with joy. I watched as he scooped her up, his eyes glistening with tears. For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I had fallen in love with, the man who had once promised me the world. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Ethan had a long way to go before he could earn my trust, or Grace's. As I stood there, watching them together, I felt a strange sense of closure. Ethan's downfall had been his own doing, but it wasn't my responsibility to save him. My focus was on Grace, on giving her the love and stability she deserved. And as I turned away, leaving Ethan to his moment with our daughter, I realized that I had finally let go of the past. Ethan's story was his own to write, but mine was just beginning. Looking back, I realized that my journey wasn't just about heartbreak or betrayal. It was about rediscovering myself, about learning what love truly means and what it doesn't. Love isn't about grand gestures or whispered promises that fade with time. It's about respect, effort, and the quiet, steady presence of someone who chooses you every single day. It took losing Ethan, losing myself, and finding Ryan to understand that. Ethan's return into Grace's life was complicated, to say the least. He tried, I'll give him that. He showed up for her school recitals, took her out for ice cream, and even remembered her birthday. But his efforts were inconsistent. Like a flickering flame that couldn't quite catch, Grace in her innocence adored him. She would run to him with open arms, her laughter filling the air. And for a moment, I would see a glimmer of the man I had once loved. But I knew better than to let my guard down. Ethan was still Ethan, charming, reliable, and always chasing something he could never quite hold on to. One evening, after he had dropped Grace off, he lingered at the door. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice hesitant. I nodded, stepping outside to join him on the porch. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. "I just wanted to say thank you," he began, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, "for letting me see her. I know I don't deserve it, but it means everything to me." I studied him for a moment, searching for the man I had once known. He looked older, wearier, as if the weight of his choices had finally caught up to him. "She deserves to know her father," I said simply. "But this isn't about you, Ethan. It's about her. Don't forget that." He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I won't," he'd said softly. I wish I could go back and do things differently. I wish I hadn't hurt you." His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, not for the man he was now, but for the man he could have been. "We can't change the past," I said, my voice steady. "But we can learn from it. I hope you do." With that, I turned and went back inside, closing the door on the chapter of my life that had once consumed me. Ethan's story was his own to write, but mine was no longer tied to his. I had found my own path, my own happiness, and I wasn't going to let anything or anyone take that away from me. Ryan was waiting for me in the living room, a book in his hands and a warm smile on his face. "Everything okay?" he asked, setting the book aside as I sat down beside him. "Yeah," I said, leaning into him, just tying up loose ends. He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me close. "You're incredible, you know that," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "The way you handle everything, it's inspiring." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. "I've had to learn a lot," I admitted, "about love, about respect, about what it means to truly be there for someone. And I've learned that it's not about perfection. It's about effort. It's about showing up, even when it's hard." Ryan nodded, his hand gently stroking my hair. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Quinn. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." His words brought tears to my eyes, but this time they weren't tears of sadness or regret. They were tears of gratitude, of hope, of a love that felt real and unshakable. Ryan wasn't just my partner. He was my safe haven, my second chance at happiness. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the weeks turned into months, our little family grew stronger. Grace adored Ryan, and he adored her right back. He wasn't just a father figure to her. He was her rock, her protector, her friend. Watching them together filled my heart with a joy I hadn't thought possible. One evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Grace looked up at Ryan with wide, innocent eyes. "Are you going to be my daddy forever?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. Ryan smiled, his eyes glistening with emotion. "If your mommy will let me," he said, glancing at me with a look that took my breath away. I reached for his hand, my heart swelling with love. "I think we can make that happen," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. In that moment, I realized that my journey had come full circle. I had been broken, betrayed, and left to pick up the pieces of a life I thought I had lost. But in the process, I had found something even greater. I had found love. Not the fleeting, superficial kind, but a love built on trust, respect, and unwavering commitment. Ethan's downfall had taught me what love isn't, but Ryan had shown me what love could be. And as I sat there,